Snow on a Colorado mountain. Hundreds of miles of white ridge after ridge, the silence so deep it has a sound of its own. Then a thread of smoke. A single cabin at the top of a ridge. Down in the valley, a small frontier town. Crooked street. Leaning steeple. Lamps lit too early in the afternoon. A white painted house at the end of Elm Street with its shutters drawn tight against the storm. Inside that house, a parlor, a grandfather clock, a porcelain shepherdess lying sideways on a Persian rug, smiling up at the ceiling. A young woman on the floor, blood on her lips. Honey blonde hair come loose from its braid. She is 22. She is 1,000 miles from anyone who knows her name. Above her, a man in a charcoal coat. He is winding back for another blow. Behind him, the front door begins to open. 3 big shadows, bear coats, boots in the snow. The blizzard comes in first. 3 months after she stepped off that train in Wraithwood Hollow, Marigold Pemberton was standing in the snow with a Winchester in her hands and her husband's blood on her boots. She was 22 years old. She was a virgin. She was a mail-order bride. And she had just killed a man. But to understand how a Boston girl ended up on a Colorado mountain holding a rifle over the body of the banker she had crossed 900 miles to marry, you have to go back to the train. The train carried her up through pines that bent under 9 days of snow, up through passes where the wind came down off the peaks and rattled the windows of the passenger car like something trying to get in, up into a sky that was not blue anymore, not anything anymore, just white. Just snow falling on snow falling on snow. Marigold Pemberton pressed her gloved hand to the cold glass, and she did not let it go. In her lap, tied in blue ribbon, sat 18 letters. She had counted them twice that morning. Once in the dim of the boarding house in Denver. Once on the platform before the conductor called all aboard. Because the letters were the only things she still had. The locket from her mother. Sold. The pearl earrings from her great-aunt in Salem. Sold. The leather Bible with the gold-edged pages. Kept, tucked at the bottom of her trunk between 2 folded petticoats, and 18 letters. She was 22 years old. Her father had been dead 5 months. She had crossed 900 miles of country she had never seen. And she was about to marry a man whose face she had never looked upon, whose voice she had never heard, whose only existence in her life until this very afternoon had been ink on paper. Soft Bostonian phrases like, "I keep a small library, mostly poetry and theology. And I hope you do not mind the wind, my dear Miss Pemberton. The wind is honest, and so are the people here." The train slowed. It groaned. It hissed steam into a sky that swallowed the steam whole. A bell rang. Once. Twice. The conductor's voice came down the aisle. Wraithwood Hollow. End of the line. Wraithwood Hollow. Marigold tightened her hand on the letters. She thought I am here. She thought I am here, and I am 22, and I do not know what I have done. And then, because she had been raised by a father who believed in dignity above everything, she lifted her chin. She straightened her shoulders. She smoothed the front of her navy blue traveling dress. She picked up her small carpet bag. She stood up. She walked toward the door of the train. The platform was wood, old wood, frozen wood. Her boot heel made a sound on it like a small bone breaking. The station was a single squat building with a stovepipe steaming into the white. Beyond it, the town of Wraithwood Hollow. She had imagined it for 18 months. She had not imagined it correctly. She had imagined a frontier village, like the engravings in Harper's Weekly. White clapboard houses, a church with a steeple, a general store with barrels of apples by the door. What she saw instead was a long, crooked street cut between snowdrifts that climbed to the second story of every building. The houses were not white. They were the color of wet wood, the color of nothing in particular, the color of a town that had been built fast and never painted because the men who built it were too busy chasing silver to care what it looked like. The church did have a steeple, but the steeple leaned slightly to the left like a man too tired to stand straight. And the people. There were not many of them. A handful, hurrying, heads down, collars up, None of them looked at her. None. She stood on the platform with her carpet bag and her 18 letters and her dignity, and she thought maybe he did not come. She thought maybe he changed his mind. She thought maybe I'm about to find out that the kindest man in Colorado was only ever a piece of paper after all. Except a figure detached from the side of the station. A tall man, charcoal suit, long black coat, bowler hat pulled low, gold watch chain visible across the waistcoat. He walked toward her with the easy confidence of a man who owned the platform he was walking on. He stopped 3 feet from her. He removed his hat. His hair was dark, oiled back from a high forehead. His face was clean-shaven, handsome in the way certain handsome men are handsome. Sharp, symmetrical, cold around the eyes. Miss Pemberton. His voice was lower than she had imagined, smoother, like a stone polished by years of running water. Mr. Crowley. Octavius. Octavius. She tried the name on her tongue. It did not fit the man in the letters. It fit this man. She did not know yet what the difference meant. You are colder than you should be, he said. Come. He did not take her arm. He turned and walked. She followed, because that was what she had crossed 900 miles to do. She followed him into Wraithwood Hollow. The church was small. The church was warm. The church smelled like beeswax and old pine and the sweet papery smell of a hymnal that has been opened 1,000 times. Reverend Pickering was waiting at the altar. He was a small man, white-haired, a face that had been kind once and was still trying to be. He looked at Marigold when she walked in. He looked at her for a long moment, and something in his eyes flickered. Marigold did not know what it was. She told herself it was nothing. She told herself it was only that he had not expected her so young or so tired or so pale. She did not know yet that what flickered in Reverend Pickering's eyes was a small, slow burn of grief, the kind a man feels when he has buried 3 young women in 3 years, and is now being asked to marry a 4th. The ceremony was brief. Crowley stood beside her in his charcoal suit. His hand was warm, heavy. He squeezed her fingers once when she said, "I will." The squeeze was firmer than it needed to be. She did not flinch, because she had been raised not to flinch. When Reverend Pickering said, "You may kiss the bride," Crowley turned to her. He bent his head. His lips brushed hers. They were dry. They were brief. And his eyes, when he straightened, did not look at her like a man looks at a bride. They looked at her like a man looks at a deed of property that has just been signed over. Marigold told herself she was imagining it, because she was tired, because the train had been long, because she had not slept properly in 9 days. She smiled. She smiled because that was what brides did. Behind her in the second pew from the back, an old woman in a black bonnet crossed herself. Slowly. Twice. Marigold did not see. The Crowley house stood at the end of Elm Street. It was the only 2-story building in Wraithwood Hollow that had been painted. The paint was white. The trim was a dark forest green. The shutters were closed against the snow. It did not look like a place a person actually lived in. Crowley opened the heavy oak door and gestured her inside. The hallway was tall. The wallpaper was a heavy maroon flocked with gold. A grandfather clock ticked at the end of the hall. Tick, tock, tick. The sound was the only sound in the house. "Bridget," Crowley said. Not loudly, not gently, just the name, like a word he was used to saying. A door opened down the hall. A young woman came out. She was perhaps 19, red hair pulled back tight, pale freckled face, a long apron over a gray dress. She kept her eyes on the floor when she walked. "Mrs. Crowley's trunk goes upstairs," he said. "The front bedroom. You may unpack for her after supper." "Yes, Mr. Crowley." The voice was Irish, soft, careful in the way a voice gets careful after years of being careful. Bridget did not look up at Marigold. Not once, not even when Crowley said, "And this is your new mistress, Miss Pemberton." Mrs. Crowley now. Bridget only said, "Welcome, ma'am," and then she took the trunk and went upstairs. Marigold watched her go. She thought, that girl is afraid. She thought that girl is afraid, and she is in this house. She thought, stop. You are tired. You are imagining things. She turned to her new husband. She made her face into the face of a grateful bride. "Thank you, Octavius. The house is lovely." He smiled. She did not like the smile. Supper was beef, roast potatoes, a pitcher of dark wine. Bridget served. Bridget did not speak. Crowley spoke. He spoke about the silver mine. He spoke about the railroad coming through Denver. He spoke about a man named Cornelius Vance who had offered him $40,000 for a piece of land Crowley would not sell. Marigold tried to follow, tried to ask the right questions, tried to be the wife he had described in his letters. In his letters, Octavius had asked her about her favorite poems, about what she had read last, about whether she preferred Whittier or Longfellow. This Octavius did not ask. This Octavius talked, and when Marigold answered, he made small, impatient sounds in his throat, like a man waiting for a child to finish so the adults could resume their conversation. She felt the cold begin in her chest, small at first, the size of a coin. By the time the plates were cleared, it had grown to the size of her fist. She told herself she was tired. She told herself she would feel different in the morning. She told herself 18 letters could not lie. 18 letters. In blue ribbon. In her carpet bag upstairs. She held on to the thought of them the way a drowning woman holds onto the thought of land. Crowley went up first. He said, "I will come to your room in 20 minutes. Make yourself ready." He said it the way a man tells a horse to stand for shoeing. He turned, he walked up the stairs. Marigold sat in the parlor a moment longer. Bridget came in to clear the wine glasses. She did not look up. Marigold said softly, "Bridget." The girl froze. "Yes, ma'am." "How long have you worked for Mr. Crowley?" A pause, a long pause. "4 years, ma'am." "You have seen the other wives?" The girl's hand tightened on the wine glass. "Yes, ma'am." "There were 3. Bridget's eyes flicked up. For one heartbeat. One. The eyes were gray. The eyes were terrified. "You are the 4th, ma'am." She set the glass down very carefully. Very carefully. She did not say anything else. She walked out of the parlor. Her shoes made no sound on the carpet. Marigold sat with her hands in her lap. The cold in her chest grew. It was the size of an apple now, the size of a heart. She thought 3. She thought 3 women came up these stairs before me. She thought, where are they? Her bedroom upstairs was large. The bed was 4 posts of dark walnut. The quilt was white. The lamp by the bedside burned low. Her carpet bag was on the trunk, open. Bridget had begun to unpack her things. The 18 letters were still tied in their blue ribbon on the nightstand. Marigold knelt on the rug beside the bed. She folded her hands. She bowed her head. She had been raised to pray before bed. She had been raised to pray before every meal. She had been raised to pray before every difficult thing. She prayed. She prayed for the wisdom to be a good wife. She prayed for the strength to make this house a home. She prayed for the 3 women who had come before her, wherever they were. She prayed for Bridget. She prayed for her father, who had died believing his daughter would be cared for. She was still praying when the bedroom door opened. Crowley stood in the doorway in a white nightshirt. The lamplight cast his shadow long against the wall. He looked at her. He looked at her kneeling on the rug with her hands folded. His face changed. It changed slowly, like a sheet of paper held over a candle that has not yet caught fire. "What are you doing?" She rose. "I was praying. I always pray before bed." "You were keeping me waiting." "I was praying, Octavius." "You will not keep me waiting in my own house." He crossed the room in 3 long strides. His hand came up. And then his hand came down. The slap was open-palmed. The slap was hard. The slap caught her across the cheek and turned her head and made the room go white at the edges. She stumbled back. Her hip struck the corner of the dresser. A small porcelain figurine of a shepherdess fell to the rug. It did not break. The shepherdess only lay on her side, smiling up at the ceiling. Marigold stood with her hand pressed to her cheek. She could not breathe, not from the pain, from something else, from the sudden, complete understanding that the man in the letters did not exist, had never existed, was not coming, was never coming. The voice that came out of her mouth did not sound like her voice. You hit me. You disobeyed me. I was praying. You will not pray in this room without my permission. He took a step toward her. She did not move, because she did not know where to move to. He took her chin in his hand. His fingers were cold. He turned her face up to his. You are my wife, he said. Do you understand what that means? She did not answer. It means, he said very quietly, that you do nothing in this house without my permission. Not pray, not eat, not breathe. Do you understand? Still she did not answer. His grip tightened. Do you understand? Yes. Yes, what? Yes, Octavius. He let go of her chin. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he sighed. The sigh was patient. The sigh was the sigh of a man dealing with an animal that had not yet been broken to harness. You are tired, he said. We will not consummate tonight. I do not want to consummate with a woman who has been weeping. Sleep. We will begin properly tomorrow. He turned. He walked out of her bedroom. He shut the door behind him. She heard the key turn in the lock. From the outside, she stood in the middle of the room, her hand to her cheek, her breath shallow. The shepherdess lay on the floor, still smiling. Marigold sank down beside the bed. She did not weep, because weeping was something she had not yet learned how to do for herself. She had wept for her father. She had wept for her mother. She had wept for the dog that died when she was 9. But she had not yet learned how to weep for Marigold. She picked up the shepherdess. She set her gently upright on the dresser. She crawled into the bed in her clothes. And she lay on her side staring at the door with the lock key on the other side. And she thought of 18 letters, and the man who had written The wind is honest, and so are the people here. And she thought, who wrote those letters? Because the man who had walked into this room tonight did not. The man who walked into this room tonight could not have. She did not sleep. She lay listening to the house, to the grandfather clock downstairs, to the wind moving against the shutters, to something else. A small sound she could not place at first. Then she placed it. It was a girl crying, softly. Down the hall. It was Bridget. Marigold lay listening to a girl cry in another room of a house she did not yet understand, and she thought, I have made a mistake. She thought, I have made a mistake, and I do not yet know how big. The next morning the door unlocked from the outside. Marigold heard the small click in the soft retreat of footsteps. She washed her face in cold water. She braided her hair. She put on her plainest day dress, a dove-gray wool with white cuffs and collar. Her cheek had a mark. She rubbed powder on it. Powder her mother had given her at 17 for occasions when a girl wished to look her best. The powder did not quite hide the mark. She studied herself in the small mirror above the washstand. She told the woman in the mirror, you will write to your Aunt Eustacia in Worcester. She told the woman in the mirror, you will tell her you have made a mistake. You will ask for money. You will go home. The woman in the mirror nodded, but the woman in the mirror did not believe, because there was no money to be sent. Aunt Eustacia was a widow with 3 children of her own. The house in Boston was already sold. The debt was already paid. There was no home to go back to. There was only this house, this town, this snow. She squared her shoulders. She went downstairs. Crowley was already gone. The bank, Bridget murmured. He would not return until evening. Marigold sat at the table. Bridget set a plate of eggs in front of her. The girls did not look at each other. Marigold said very softly, "Bridget, look at me." The girl froze. "Please." Bridget looked up, just for a moment, just long enough for Marigold to see the gray eyes, the freckled cheeks, the bruise along the jaw that Bridget had also tried to cover with powder. The two women looked at each other in a silent kitchen. Two bruises, two layers of powder, two pairs of eyes that understood each other completely in the space of a single second. Bridget whispered, "Eat your eggs, ma'am, please. He counts the dishes." She turned. She went back to the stove. After breakfast, Marigold asked permission to go to the general store. Bridget said Mr. Crowley had left instructions that the mistress might walk in town if she wished, provided she returned by noon, provided she spoke to no one beyond what civility required. Marigold thanked her. She put on her cloak. She put on her bonnet. She wound her wool scarf twice around her neck the way her father had taught her when she was small. She went out into the cold. The cold was a kind of cold she had not known before. It bit through the cloak. It bit through the wool. It found the skin underneath and it sat there. She walked down Elm Street toward the center of town. Her boots crunched on packed snow. A few faces watched her from behind windows. A few faces turned away. She thought they are watching the fourth wife. She thought, stop, walk, eyes ahead. The general store was at the corner of Elm and Front Street. A bell rang above the door when she pushed it open. The store was warm. The store smelled like coffee beans and tobacco and pickle brine and old cedar shelves. There were 3 men inside. 3. She saw them before they saw her. They stood at the back of the store at the long counter where the dry goods were weighed out. 3 big men, big in the way mountain men are big. Big through the chest and the shoulders. Big in their boots and their bare coats and the wool of their shirts and the way they stood. The tallest one stood in the middle, black hair slightly long falling across his forehead. A jagged, pale scar ran from his left temple down to his jawline. A face that had seen weather. Eyes she could not see yet because his head was bent toward the goods on the counter. To his right, slightly shorter, leaner, lighter hair, a quieter posture. The kind of man who watched everything and said little. To his left, the youngest, wiry, red-brown hair pulled back in a leather thong, a grin already at the corner of his mouth like a man who had not yet learned not to grin in public. 3 brothers. She knew it immediately. She did not know how she knew. She only knew. She walked toward the front counter where the shopkeeper stood behind a small brass scale weighing flour into a paper sack. The bell on the door had rung when she came in. Behind her now, she heard a small shuffle. The smallest pause in the conversation at the back of the store. The brothers had noticed her. She did not turn around. She set her small list on the counter. Tea, the black, a quarter pound, thread black silk 1 spool, and a tin of ginger cookies if you have them. The shopkeeper was a thin man with a gray beard. He looked at her. He looked at her cheek. His eyes moved away. "Yes, ma'am. Right away, Mrs. Crowley." Mrs. Crowley. The name landed in the warm air of the general store and the air went a little cold. She heard the silence at the back of the store deepen by exactly 1 heartbeat. She did not turn around. The shopkeeper measured out her tea. He counted the spool of thread. He reached for the tin of ginger cookies on the shelf behind him. The tin was the last one. He lifted it. He set it on the counter. He hesitated. "That'll be $1.20, ma'am." She opened her small reticule. She counted out the coin. She set the coin on the counter. She picked up the parcel, and then a voice spoke from the back of the store. A low voice, not loud, not at all loud. The kind of voice a big man uses when he does not need to be loud because his voice will carry anyway, and he knows it. "Hold a moment." Marigold's hand froze on the parcel. She did not turn. Footsteps, heavy boots on the plank floor. 3 sets, but only one approaching the counter. A shadow fell beside her. Big shadow. Bare coat. Smell of pine and wood smoke and clean cold. He set a coin on the counter next to hers. a silver dollar. Put it on my account, Whitfield, the voice said. Mrs. Crowley's cookies, and whatever else she came in for. The shopkeeper looked up. His eyes moved between the silver dollar and the man in Marigold's coin. His mouth opened. His mouth closed. He said very carefully, Mr. Hollander, I don't believe Mr. Crowley would care for. I am not asking what Mr. Crowley would care for, the voice said, still low, still even. I am asking you to put the cookies on my account. Marigold made herself turn her head. Just a little. Just enough to see him. He was even taller than she had thought. He was looking down at the counter, not at her. His jaw was set. The scar on his face was older than she had thought. Pale and clean. The kind of scar that has been there since boyhood. His hands rested on the counter. The hands were big, scarred. The knuckles were the knuckles of a man who worked. He did not look at her. He said, still not looking, apologies for interrupting your purchase, ma'am. The ginger cookies are the last 10 until the spring wagon comes through. I would not have wished you to pay for them and arrive at a house where they would not be welcome. She did not understand at first. Then she did. He had seen the bruise. He had seen the powder. He had heard her name. He knew. He knew already. He knew before she had said a word. She felt the cold in her chest begin to thaw at one small edge, the size of a pinprick, the size of a single sunlit speck on a winter window. Thank you, she heard herself say. He nodded. Once. He still did not look at her. He turned. He walked back toward his brothers at the rear of the store. His boots were quiet on the planks for a man of his size. He moved like a man who had spent a lifetime not startling things. She picked up the parcel of cookies. She slid the coin she had laid down back into her reticule. The shopkeeper would not meet her eye. She walked toward the door. At the door, she paused. She did not know why she paused. She glanced back. The youngest brother, the red-brown-haired one, was grinning openly now. The middle brother had a small, careful smile at the corner of his mouth. The eldest, the one with the scar, was not smiling. He was watching her. Now. For the first time. His eyes were gray. They were not cold. They were not warm. They were something else. They were attentive. The way a man is attentive when he is listening to a sound far off in the woods trying to decide what kind of animal it is. He held her gaze for one heartbeat. He nodded again, just barely. She left. Outside the cold was the same cold. Outside the snow was the same snow. The town was the same town. But something in her chest had moved. A small, warm something. Not hope. She did not yet allow hope. Hope was a thing she had spent on a paper man in 18 letters, and she had nothing left to spend. It was something smaller than hope. It was the recognition that there was a man in this town who had looked at her bruise and offered her ginger cookies instead of pity. Which was perhaps the same thing as dignity, which was perhaps the only thing she had left. She walked home slowly. She held the tin of ginger cookies against her chest under her cloak. They were warm. They smelled like Boston. They smelled like her mother's kitchen on a December afternoon when she was 6 years old. She walked back into the Crowley house. She climbed the stairs to her bedroom. She set the tin of ginger cookies on her dressing table. And she sat on the edge of the bed for a long time with her hands folded in her lap, and she thought. She thought, his name is Hollander. She thought, there are 3 of them. She thought the eldest has a scar. The middle one watches, the youngest grins. She thought they live somewhere, outside town. She thought, I do not know what any of that means. She thought, I do not yet need to know. Crowley returned at sundown. He smelled of cigar smoke and bourbon in the cold. He did not strike her again that evening. He did not strike her because he did not need to. The lesson had been delivered. The lesson had been received. The house had a new rhythm now, and she was learning the rhythm fast. He asked her how her day had been. She said it had been quiet. He asked if she had walked in town. She said yes, to the general store. He asked what she had bought. She said tea, black silk thread, a tin of ginger cookies. She did not say who had paid for the cookies. She did not know why she did not say. She only knew as she said it that she would not say. Not ever. Not even later. The tin of ginger cookies in her dressing table drawer would belong to her and to her alone, and not to this man at the head of this table. He accepted her answers. He smiled the smile she did not like. He said, "Tomorrow you will not need to walk to the store. Bridget will go for you. I do not want my wife being stared at." She lowered her eyes. She said, "Yes, Octavius." He patted her hand. His palm was warm, heavy. She did not pull away. She had learned that already. That night she did not pray on the rug. She prayed in bed. She prayed silently with her face to the wall, with her hands folded under the quilt where no one could see them. She prayed for Bridget. She prayed for the 3 women who had come before her. She prayed for whoever the Hollander brothers were and whatever they meant by what they had done. She prayed for forgiveness, for having believed a stranger because the stranger had used the right words. And just before she slept, she opened her eyes one last time. The 18 letters in their blue ribbons sat on her nightstand. Crowley had not noticed them, or had noticed them and dismissed them, or had read them in her absence. She did not know which. She watched them in the lamplight. She thought tomorrow. She thought tomorrow I will read them again. She thought tomorrow I will read them with new eyes. She did not have to wait for tomorrow. She woke at 2 in the morning. The house was dark. The grandfather clock downstairs had just struck the hour. 2 slow, heavy chimes that traveled up the stairs and settled in the walls. She lay listening. The house was quiet. Crowley's bedroom was at the far end of the hall. She had heard him retire at 10. She had heard the snore begin at 1:30. She got up. She did not light a lamp. She knew the room well enough by now. She lifted the 18 letters from her nightstand. She held them against her chest. She went to the bedroom door. It was not locked tonight. Of course it was not. He had no reason. She was the trained animal now. She was the wife who had been taught. She turned the knob slowly. She opened the door. She stepped into the hall. The hall was lit by one low lamp at the top of the stairs. She walked toward the back of the house, past Crowley's bedroom, past the closed door of Bridget's small room, past the linen closet, to the door at the end of the hall, Crowley's study. The door was closed but not locked. He had not bothered to lock it. He did not believe his wife had the spine to open a door she had not been invited through. She turned the knob. She stepped inside. The study smelled of cigar and bourbon and old paper. A heavy mahogany desk, a leather chair, a bookcase full of ledgers, a green-shaded banker's lamp on the desk unlit. She lit a candle she had brought from the hall. She crossed to the desk. She did not know what she was looking for. She told herself she did not know. But her hand went without her telling it to the bottom drawer of the desk. The drawer on the right. The deepest one. She tried it. Locked. Of course. Her father had been a lawyer. Her father had kept letters from clients in a locked drawer just like this one. Her father had also taught her when she was 17 and bored on a rainy Sunday that any pin from a lady's hair could be persuaded to undo a desk drawer if the lady was patient enough. She took a pin from her hair. She knelt down. She was patient enough. The lock clicked. She slid the drawer open. Inside the drawer was a stack of letters. Letters tied with blue ribbon. Marigold's breath stopped. She lifted the stack out. She set it on the desk. She set her own stack of 18 letters beside it. They were identical. The same paper, the same ribbon, the same handwriting on the outside. She untied the ribbon on the drawer letters. She unfolded the top letter. It was hers. Her own handwriting. Her own Dear Mr. Crowley. Her own I read Whittier last week and thought of you. Her own 17-month-old greetings neatly preserved. He had kept them. That was not the shock. She had expected somewhere in the back of her mind that he had kept her letters. A man buying a bride from 900 miles away would keep the bride's letters. That was only sensible. The shock was underneath. Beneath her letters in the same drawer was a second stack, tied in a different ribbon, black not blue. She lifted it. She untied it. She unfolded the top letter. It was to her. It was from him, from Octavius Crowley, dated November 1877. The very first letter she had ever received from her future husband. She knew the letter. She knew the words by heart. Dear Miss Pemberton, I write to you in response to your kind inquiry regarding the advertisement placed in the Boston Christian Recorder. I am a widower of 43 years in good health, in steady means, and in possession of a quiet home in the Colorado high country. I keep a small library, mostly poetry and theology. I hope you do not mind the wind, my dear Miss Pemberton. The wind is honest, and so are the people here. She read the words, she knew the words, but she did not know the handwriting. The handwriting was not the handwriting of the man who had locked her bedroom door from the outside last night. She had seen Crowley's handwriting on the ledger he had carried into the parlor that morning. Heavy, slanting, angry, the handwriting of a man who pressed too hard with the nib. This handwriting was different. This handwriting was light, careful, slightly looped the way a girl's handwriting loops when she has been taught penmanship in a school where penmanship still mattered. This handwriting was not Octavius Crowley's. This handwriting belonged to someone else, someone who knew Whittier, someone who knew that the wind was honest, someone who, for 18 months, had been writing letters to a young woman in Boston in the name of a man who could not have written them. Someone who lived in this house. Marigold sat down very slowly in the leather chair. She held the letter in her hand. She thought of Bridget. She thought of Bridget's gray eyes lifting for 1 second across a kitchen. She thought of the careful, careful way Bridget had set down the wine glass and said, "You are the fourth, ma'am." She thought, oh. She thought, oh no. She thought, oh, you brave, terrified girl. The candle flickered. Somewhere in the house, the grandfather clock struck the half hour. And Marigold Pemberton, who had crossed 900 miles of country she had never seen to marry a man whose face she had never looked upon, understood for the first time in her young life that the truth in a Colorado mining town did not arrive the way it arrived in Boston. It arrived in pieces. It arrived at night. It arrived in a stranger's handwriting on a stack of letters in a locked drawer. And it did not stop arriving, not until you had read every last word. She blew out the candle. She put the letters back exactly as she had found them. She locked the drawer. She went back to her bedroom. She lay in the dark with her heart beating very steadily, very calmly, the way a heart beats when the mind above it has just decided something important. She thought, I will not run. She thought, I cannot run. There is nowhere to run to. She thought, I will stay, and I will find out. She thought, I will find out what happened to the 3 women before me. She thought, I will find out who wrote the letters. She thought, I will find out why a man in a bear coat at the general store paid for my ginger cookies and would not meet my eye until I was leaving. She thought, in whatever I find out, I will not be alone with it for very long. She did not yet know if that last thought was true, but she chose to believe it. She had to. It was the only thing she had left to spend. Outside the Crowley house, the snow began to fall again. It fell on Elm Street. It fell on the leaning steeple of the church. It fell on the roof of the general store. It fell on 3 sets of horse tracks leading out of town and up into the mountains where a cabin stood at the top of Frost Fang Ridge, and 3 brothers sat by a fire and did not yet know that a young woman in a navy dress had begun that very night to walk slowly and deliberately toward them through the dark. But she had begun, and the snow that fell that night fell on her path, and the snow could not cover it, not all the way, not yet. The blizzard came on a Tuesday. The sky had been bruised purple since dawn. By noon, the wind had teeth. By 3 o'clock, the snow was sideways. By 5, the town of Wraithwood Hollow had drawn its shutters and lit its lamps and gone quiet in the way frontier towns go quiet when the mountains decide to remind them who is in charge. Marigold stood at the parlor window and watched the snow come down. She had been the wife of Octavius Crowley for 7 days. 7. She had counted them. She had counted them the way a woman counts steps across a frozen river. Slowly. Eye on the next plank. Eye on the next plank after that. Bridget was in the kitchen. Bridget had not looked at her properly since the night of the wine glass. Crowley was not home. Crowley had ridden to a meeting with the Denver and Rio Grande men at 11 that morning. The meeting was at the Hollow's only hotel. The meeting concerned a stretch of right-of-way the railroad wanted and Crowley would not sell. Marigold knew because Crowley had told her at breakfast. Crowley had told her in the same voice he used for the weather, as if she were a hat rack, as if she were an ear with a body attached. She had nodded. She had said, "Yes, Octavius." She had buttered her toast. But under the table her hands had been cold, because she had read the letters again. All of them. 3 nights running. In the locked drawer she now had the hairpin trick for. And she had begun to see. She had begun to see what Bridget the housemaid supposedly knew about Whittier, about theology, about the wind. The girl who scrubbed the front steps in the morning and would not lift her eyes had written the letters that made Marigold cross 900 miles of country. The girl with the bruise on her jaw. The girl who whispered, "He counts the dishes." Marigold pressed her forehead against the cold glass and watched the snow. She thought tonight. She thought tonight I will speak to her properly. She did not know yet that tonight she would not have the chance. Crowley came home at 6. He did not come home well. She heard the door before she saw him. The way the door slammed open then slammed shut told her everything she needed to know about how the meeting at the hotel had gone. The hinges of the front door took a kind of punishment that night that hinges do not forget. She rose from her chair. She set down her sewing. She did what she had been trained in 7 days to do. She walked into the hall. She stood with her hands clasped in front of her. She lowered her eyes. "Welcome home, Octavius." He did not answer. He walked past her into the parlor. He went straight to the sideboard. He poured himself a tumbler of bourbon. He drank it in 2 swallows. He poured another. She stood in the doorway. She did not enter. She was learning the rhythm. The rhythm said, "Do not enter when the bourbon is being poured the second time." "They bypassed me," he said. He said it to the sideboard, not to her. "The railroad. They went around me, 10 miles, around my land, to Silverton. The bastards went to Silverton. I am sorry, Octavius." He turned. He looked at her. His eyes were not the eyes of the man at breakfast. They were not the eyes of the man at the altar. They were the eyes of something underneath the man, something that had been in the cellar a long time. "You are sorry." "Yes." "You are sorry." "Yes, Octavius." "What in God's name," he said very softly, "do you have to be sorry about?" Then he crossed the parlor. Then he hit her, open palm first, the way he had hit her the first night, across the cheek that had only just stopped showing the powder. She fell sideways. She caught herself on the parlor table. A small porcelain bowl of pine cones fell to the rug. He was not done. He was not nearly done. He hit her again, closed fist this time, into her side. She felt something give under the corset, something that was not the corset, something that was a rib. She tried to breathe. She could not. "Octavius." She did not know whose voice that was. Hers. A small, clear voice. Octavius. The kind of voice a child uses to call back a dog that is too far gone to come. He did not hear it. He hit her again and again. He was speaking. He was speaking, but the words were no longer words. The words were noises. The noises were the noises a man makes when the thing inside him that has been in the cellar a long time has finally come up the stairs. She slid to the floor. She tasted blood. She thought very clearly. 3 women died this way. She thought 3 women died this way, and the town did nothing. She thought, I am the 4th. She did not lose consciousness. Not yet. She held it. She held it the way her father had taught her to hold a runaway horse. Calm hands, calm voice, stay in the saddle. Through the buzzing in her ears, she heard the front door. She heard a girl screaming. Bridget. Bridget was screaming. Bridget was screaming, stop it, stop it. Mr. Crowley, you'll kill her, stop it. Bridget had never spoken above a whisper in 7 days. Bridget was screaming. Crowley turned. Crowley turned toward Bridget. Marigold thought no. She thought, no, leave her, leave her. She has done nothing. She has only ever tried to warn me. But her mouth would not work. Her mouth was full of blood. The world went small. The world went small and dim and tilted at the edges. The last thing she saw before it went black was the front door behind Bridget. The door was not closed. The door was open. The blizzard was coming in. The blizzard was coming in, and the snow was blowing across the floorboards in a long white tongue, and somewhere behind the snow, 3 big dark shapes were already coming up the porch steps. 3. She thought 3. Then she thought nothing at all. The world came back in pieces. First the cold, cold across her face, cold like a wet hand laid on her cheek. Then the smell, bare, wood smoke, pine pitch, something else, something animal and warm and male. Then the motion. She was being carried. Whoever was carrying her was moving fast. The motion was even. The motion was the motion of a man who had carried wounded things many times before. She did not open her eyes. She did not want to. Not yet. Because if she opened her eyes, the dream might end and the parlor might come back. Someone was talking, low, close to her ear. Easy, easy now, we have you. Keep breathing. That's it. Keep breathing. A voice she knew. A voice from a general store 7 days ago. The eldest brother, the one with the scar, the one who had paid for ginger cookies. She thought, oh, you came. She did not know if she said it out loud. She lost the world again. The next time it came back, she was on a horse. She was on a horse, and the horse was moving, and the wind was howling, and somewhere a man with a low voice was holding her against his chest. His chest was warm. His coat was thick. His arm around her was steady. She blinked. The world was white. The world was white in every direction. White above, white below, white driven sideways across her face by a wind that had teeth. But the chest was warm, and the arm was steady. She tried to lift her head. A voice said, no, stay down. We have a long way yet. She stayed down. She heard a second voice somewhere behind. A younger voice. Faster. Zeke, the mare's slowing. She'll hold. Mordecai's having a time with the packs. He'll hold too. Ride. Hooves in deep snow, the labored breath of a hard-worked horse. The wind, the wind, the wind. She faded again. She came back to the smell of pine and fire. She came back to the warmth of furs. She came back to a low ceiling of dark log beams and a hearth burning small and orange across the room, and the sound of 3 men moving quietly. Quietly. The way men move around a sleeping thing they do not wish to wake. She did not open her eyes all the way. She watched through her lashes. The firelight caught the scar on the eldest cheek and made it look softer than it was. He had taken off the bear coat. He was speaking very low to the middle brother, who knelt beside her cot. The middle brother's hands were doing something to her arm, something careful, something practiced. The arm hurt. She realized this slowly. The arm hurt because the arm was broken. She remembered now. She remembered the parlor. She remembered the rib. She remembered the rug. She remembered the porcelain bowl of pine cones rolling and rolling. The middle brother said very softly, she's awake. The eldest turned, his face in the firelight, the gray eyes that had looked at her over the counter at the general store. They were looking at her now. He crossed the room in 3 steps. He knelt at the side of the cot. He did not touch her. He said, "Miss." She tried to speak. Her mouth would not. He said, "Don't. Mordecai's setting the arm. It's going to hurt. Then you sleep. Do you understand?" She nodded. The motion sent pain through her face. He saw it. He winced. He had a wince. The man with the scar on the shoulders had a wince. She filed this away in the back of her mind like a coin she might need later. "Mordecai," he said. The middle brother said, "Ready." The eldest looked at her. "Look at me," he said. She looked. "Don't look at your arm. Look at me. Keep looking." She kept looking. The gray eyes were not cold. The gray eyes were the eyes of a man who had a thing he had to do and did not enjoy doing it. "Breathe in," he said. She breathed in. "Out." She breathed out. The middle brother pulled. The bone went home with a sound she felt rather than heard. A small white star exploded behind her eyes. She did not scream. She did not have the breath to scream. She only kept looking at the gray eyes. The gray eyes did not look away. Then the white star spread. Then the white star ate the room. She slept. For 3 weeks, she did not really wake. She floated. She floated in a fever that came up out of the cuts on her face. Mordecai cleaned them. Mordecai cleaned them with a tincture that smelled of yarrow and something sharper, something she did not know the name of. He bound them with strips of clean cotton. He changed the bindings twice a day. He did not speak much. When he did speak, it was to the cabin, not to her. He said things like, "The fever's lower this morning." He said things like, "She took the broth." He said things like, "Easy on the arm, Zeke. Don't shift her." Zeke. That was the eldest. Zeke. Short for something. She did not know what. There was a third voice in the room sometimes, the youngest, the one with the red-brown hair. He laughed easily. He laughed at things she could not see. He brought wood in. He brought snow in on his boots and got scolded for it. He stomped on the threshold and apologized. He called the middle brother Doc, even though the middle brother was not a doctor. He called the eldest Zeke, or sometimes brother, and sometimes when he thought no one was listening, and the eldest was outside with the horses, he called him boss. She slept. She woke, she slept, she woke. Once she opened her eyes in the deep blue middle of a night and saw the eldest sitting in a chair beside the cot. His back was against the wall. His arms were crossed. He was asleep. She looked at him for a long time. She thought, "I do not know your name yet." She thought, "Not really." She thought, "Whoever you are sleeping in that chair, so I will not be alone when I wake." She thought, "Thank you." She thought, "Thank you." She closed her eyes. She slept again. She came back to herself properly on a morning in early December. She knew it was December because the youngest brother said so. He came in stamping snow off his boots, and he said, "First of the month, Morty, you owe me $1." Mordecai looked up from the table where he was grinding something dry in a wooden mortar. "I owe you nothing. You bet me $1 she'd wake before December." "I bet you nothing." "You did." "I did not." "Zeke, tell him." The eldest came in from the lean-to behind the cabin. He was carrying an armful of split pine. He said, "Phineas, the lady is awake. Stop yelling." "Phineas." That was the youngest. "Phineas." The youngest turned. He saw her looking at him from the cot. His face went through 3 different expressions in 2 seconds. Surprise, delight, and then a kind of bashful softening, as if he had just realized he had been making noise in a church. "Ma'am," he said. "Hello," she whispered. It was the first word she had spoken in 3 weeks. It came out cracked. It came out as a sound more than a word. But Phineas heard it as a word. Phineas grinned a grin that took up the whole lower half of his face. He said very loudly, "She talked." Mordecai set down the mortar. The eldest set down the wood. All 3 of them came over. The 3 biggest men she had ever seen in her life. All 3 of them looking down at her in a cot in a one-room cabin somewhere, on the top of a mountain in the middle of a Colorado winter, and all three of them looking at her like she was the most important thing currently happening anywhere on earth. She tried to sit up. The eldest said, "No, lie still. Mordecai, water." Mordecai brought a tin cup of water. He held it to her lips. She drank. The water was the first thing she had tasted in 3 weeks that was not broth. It tasted like melted snow. It tasted like the inside of a clean tin cup. It tasted like the first thing she had been allowed to taste of her own accord since the night she had been hit. She drank the whole cup. She lay back. She looked at them. 1, 2, 3. She said, "Thank you." The eldest sat down in the chair by the cot. He looked at her for a long moment. He said, "What is your name?" She blinked. She thought, "He does not know my name." She thought, "He carried me up a mountain in a blizzard, and he set my arm, and he sat in this chair for 3 weeks, and he does not know my name." She said, "Marigold." He nodded. "Marigold." "Pemberton." A small pause. "Crowley," he said. It was not a question. She closed her eyes. She said, "Pemberton. I am Marigold Pemberton. The other name is not mine. It was never mine. It belongs on a piece of paper. It does not belong to me." The eldest sat very still. After a moment he said, "All right then." Just that. "All right then." It was the kindest sentence anyone had said to her in 7 days and 3 weeks. He held out his hand. His hand was as big as a plate. The knuckles were scarred. The nails were short and clean. "Ezekiel Hollander," he said. She lifted her good hand from the quilt. She put it in his. His hand was warm. The hand swallowed hers and did not squeeze. The hand only held. "Ezekiel. Zeke is fine." "Zeke." He nodded. "That's Mordecai," he said. "The one trying to look like he isn't watching." "That's Phineas. The one trying to look like he isn't grinning." "We're brothers, sort of. The longer answer takes a while." "I would like the longer answer," she said. "When I am stronger." He smiled. For the first time since she had met him, the eldest Hollander smiled. The smile changed his face. The smile turned the man who had carried her up a mountain in a blizzard into a man who somewhere underneath the scar and the shoulders and the gray eyes was 34 years old and had not had nearly enough reasons to smile in his life. He said, "When you are stronger." He let go of her hand. He stood up. He said to his brothers, "She needs sleep and broth and then more sleep. Morty, Finn, outside." They went outside. She slept. December turned to January. She learned the cabin. The cabin was one room and a loft. The walls were unpeeled pine. The chinking was mud and horsehair and somebody's old wool sock. The roof was sod with a stovepipe coming up through the middle. The hearth was riverstone. The floor was plank. There were 3 cots and a long pine table and 4 chairs and a rocking chair and a rifle rack along the east wall and a bookshelf along the west. A bookshelf. She saw it on her 3rd day of being properly awake. She turned her head on the pillow. She saw it. She stared at it. She said, "Zeke." He came over from the hearth. "Yes, ma'am." "Why do you have a bookshelf?" He looked at the bookshelf. He looked at her. He said, "Because we have books." She waited. He said, "Our mother had books. When she died, they were what was left of her. We kept them." He did not say anything else. He went back to the hearth. She watched the bookshelf for a long time after that. The bindings were old. Some were Bibles, some were poetry. She could read the lettering on the spine of one of them from her cot. Whittier. She closed her eyes. She thought, of course. She thought, of course. In January, she could sit up. In January, she could feed herself. In January, she could walk with her good arm braced against the wall from the cot to the rocking chair by the hearth. The walk was 12 feet. The walk took her 3 minutes the first time. By the end of the week, the walk took her 30 seconds. She sat in the rocking chair and watched the brothers live. Phineas, the youngest, came in and out a dozen times a day. He brought wood. He brought a hare. He brought a brace of grouse. He brought the news that the snowshoes had broken and would need new sinew. He brought the news that the bay mare was favoring her left fore. He brought mostly himself. He brought himself like a draft of warm air every time the door opened. She found she had begun to listen for his boots on the porch. Mordecai, the middle one, sat at the long table with his herbs in his small clay jars. He did not speak unless asked. When he was asked, he answered carefully. He told her the name of every plant he laid out: yarrow, comfrey, mullein, plantain, sage. He told her what each one did. He told her on the third day she sat in the rocking chair that she should drink raspberry leaf tea every morning until her body had remembered how to be hers again. She did not know what he meant by hers again. She did not ask. She drank the tea. Ezekiel, the eldest, was outside more than he was inside. He worked. He worked the way men work who do not know how to do anything else with their grief. He chopped wood until there was more wood than they could burn in 3 winters. He cleared the path to the lean-to twice a day, even when the snow had not fallen. He brushed the horses. He oiled the rifles. He repaired the tack. He came in at sundown with snow in his beard and his cheeks red from the cold, and he sat in the chair across from the rocking chair, and he asked her how she had spent the day. She told him. She told him about the Whittier book she had begun to read with her good hand. She told him about the conversation Phineas had started with her in the morning, about whether a wolverine could take down a yearling moose that she had not been able to answer because she had never seen either animal. She told him about Mordecai's herbs. She told him after a few evenings the truth about Wraithwood Hollow. She told him about Crowley, about the 18 letters, about the locked drawer, about the second handwriting, about Bridget. She told him about the 3 wives who had come before her. He listened. He did not interrupt. He did not say, "I'm sorry." He did not say, "That's terrible." He did not say any of the things people say who are listening, but not really listening. He listened the way a man listens who is going to do something about what he is hearing. When she finished, he was quiet a long time. Then he said very softly, "Marigold." It was the first time he had said her name. It startled her. She said yes. He said, 3 weeks ago you were carried into this cabin half dead. You have one job between now and the spring thaw. Your job is to get strong. Your job is not to think about Octavius Crowley. Mordecai and Phineas and I will think about Octavius Crowley. We have been thinking about Octavius Crowley for 12 years already. A few more months will not change anything. Do you understand? She stared at him. She said, 12 years. He looked into the fire. He said, 12 years. He did not say more. She did not ask, not yet. But she filed the number in the back of her mind with the wince and the smile and the boots on the porch and the bookshelf and the Whittier and the careful way Mordecai said raspberry leaf and the way Phineas grinned at nothing. She filed 12 years. She thought something happened 12 years ago in this family. She thought something happened 12 years ago, and I have walked into the middle of it. She thought, and I do not yet know how, but I think I'm going to be the one who finishes it. The first true reckoning came on a snowed-in afternoon late in January. Phineas had gone to check the trap line. Mordecai had gone with him because the trap on the upper creek had a sprung jaw that needed 2 men to reset. Ezekiel had stayed. Ezekiel was sitting at the long table mending a strap of harness leather. Marigold was in the rocking chair by the fire, with the Whittier book open in her lap. She said, "Zeke." He looked up. She said, "The letters." He waited. She said, "I want to tell you something about the letters. I want to tell you something I have been trying to make myself say for a week." He set the harness down. He turned his chair to face her. He said, "All right." She said, "I read all 18 of them again the week before he hit me. Crowley. I read them in his study at night. I read them with the candle." "Yes." "They are not in his handwriting." A pause. He said, "What?" She said, "The letters I received in Boston, the letters that asked me to come here, the letters that said the wind is honest and the people here are honest. They are not in Crowley's handwriting. I have seen Crowley's handwriting now. His ledger, his bank papers. The hand is wrong. The slant is wrong. The pressure is wrong. The letters were written by someone else, someone in his house, someone who knew Whittier, someone with looped, careful penmanship like a girl who was taught in a parish school. Ezekiel sat very still. He said, "Bridget." She nodded. "Bridget," she said. He stared at the fire. He stared at the fire for a long time. Then he said in a voice she had not yet heard from him, a voice that was lower and rougher than the voice he had used on her arm 3 weeks ago. "Marigold." What was the housemaid's full name? She said, "Bridget Tully." He closed his eyes. He closed his eyes for so long she thought maybe he had stopped breathing. When he opened them, the gray was wet. Not weeping, not yet, just wet, just shining. He said, "Bridget Tully wrote those letters." She said, "Yes." He said, "Bridget Tully was trying to bring help into that house." She said, "Yes." He said, "She wrote to a girl in Boston. She wrote 18 letters in her master's name. She put her own neck in the noose every time she sat down with a pen. Crowley used her hand because his own was too coarse to charm a Boston girl. He thought a housemaid's penmanship would never betray him because nobody would ever ask a housemaid anything. She signed it Octavius Crowley because that was the only signature he would let leave the house. But she told you the wind was honest, because the wind is honest, and because she could not write you the truth he would have read over her shoulder. She wrote you a coded plea, Marigold, for a year and a half. He stood up. He walked once around the table. He stopped. He said, "And the 3 wives before you, Bridget was there for all 3. Marigold whispered, "Yes." He said, "Bridget Tully has been alone in that house with him for 4 years and watched 3 women die." "Yes." And the only thing she could think of to do was write letters to a stranger 900 miles away. "Yes." He sat down again. He put his face in his hands. She had never seen him do that. Not once, not when Mordecai cleaned her cuts, not when the bone went home, not in any of the 3 weeks she had floated in his cabin half-conscious. She got up out of the rocking chair. She walked the 12 feet across the cabin floor on her own 2 feet. She put her good hand on his shoulder. He did not move. She said, "Zeke." He said into his hands, "We have to get her out of there." She said, "Yes." He said, "Before the spring, before we go down, we have to get her out of that house." She said, "Yes." He lifted his face. His eyes were dry now, dry and very gray and very, very angry. He said, "Marigold, I am going to tell you something now, and you are going to listen to me, and you are not going to interrupt. Do you agree?" She said, "I agree." He said, "When the snow melts, there will be men coming up this mountain. Crowley will send them. He will not let his wife walk away from him. He has not let any of the others walk away. The wives before you, Marigold, they did not run off. They did not die of fevers. They are not in Denver. They are buried, all 3 of them, somewhere on his property, and the town knows it, and the sheriff knows it, and the only thing that has kept him doing it for more than a decade is that nobody has had the spine to make him stop. Do you understand?" She said, "I understand." He said, "When those men come, we are going to stop him. All 3 of us, and you. If you want." She said, "I want." He said, "But until then you rest. You read. You eat what Mordecai gives you. You let your arm finish knitting. And you do not blame yourself for any of it. You did not walk yourself into this. You were walked. 18 letters walked you. A man in a charcoal suit walked you. A whole town that turned its back walked you. You did not walk yourself. Do you understand?" She nodded. She nodded, and she did not realize until a moment later that her face was wet. She had finally learned how to weep for Marigold. Ezekiel did not move to wipe the tears. He did not pull her toward him. He did not do any of the things she half expected a man to do. He only sat in the chair and looked up at her with his hand resting under hers where she had laid her hand on his shoulder, and he let her cry. He let her cry until she was done. Then he stood up. Then very carefully, very slowly, the way a man would lift something precious he had just been entrusted with, he put his arms around her. He held her. Not for long, not too long, long enough. He smelled of pine smoke and clean wool, and the cold and something underneath that was him. He let her go. He stepped back. He said, "Marigold." She said, "Yes." He said, "I have not held a woman in this cabin in 12 years. I want you to know that. I want you to know that I will not hold you again unless you ask me to, but I will be here every day until the snow goes and after." She said, "Thank you." She said, "Zeke." He waited. She said, "I think I will ask you to." He smiled. Not the big smile. The other one, the smaller one. The one that was only for her. He said, "All right then." The second discovery came in early February. Mordecai had been moving things in the loft, cleaning, making space because Phineas had decided with no particular permission that Marigold ought to have her own corner now that she was getting strong enough to climb the ladder. He came down the ladder with a small wooden trunk under one arm. He set the trunk on the long table. He said, "Zeke." Zeke looked over. Mordecai said, "It's Maz." Zeke went still. The way men go still when something they had buried a long time ago has just been set on the table in front of them. He crossed the room. He looked at the trunk. He did not touch it. He said, "I haven't opened that in 11 years. Mordecai said, "I know." Zeke said, "Why have you brought it down?" Mordecai said, "Because Marigold should see it." Zeke turned and looked at her. She was sitting in the rocking chair. She had been watching them. She set the Whittier book aside. She came to the table. The trunk was small, cedar by the smell, brass corners, a simple iron latch. She said, "Zeke, whose was this?" He said, "Our mother's, Saoirse Hollander. She raised us. She is buried in the meadow behind this cabin." She said, "May I?" He said, "Yes." She lifted the latch. She opened the trunk. Inside, a folded shawl, green wool, moth-eaten at one edge, a pair of small reading glasses in a tin case, a handful of letters in their own ribbon, red ribbon, faded. And underneath everything at the very bottom of the trunk, a leather-bound book, hand-stitched, the cover worn smooth as a river stone by 12 years of fingers, a diary. Marigold lifted it. She looked at Ezekiel. He nodded once. She opened the diary to the first page. The handwriting inside was small, careful, looped slightly the way a girl's handwriting loops when she has been taught penmanship in a school where penmanship still mattered. The first page was dated September 1854. It read, "Today I have decided to keep a journal. Liam says a journal is a silly thing for a future farmer's wife, but I shall keep one anyway. I am 27 years old. I do not wish to forget what 27 was like, even if no one else cares to remember." Marigold sat down at the table. She turned pages. She turned pages slowly. September 1854. October 1854. November, December. Saoirse Hollander married Liam Hollander in March of 1855, and they moved to a small cabin in the Colorado high country, and they decided they could not have children, and they would foster the 3 orphan boys whose mother had died of cholera on the wagon train that summer. The 3 boys were 11 and 7 and 4. Their names were Ezekiel and Mordecai and Phineas. Saoirse wrote them down on the day she met them in the same careful penmanship, and underneath she wrote, "I think I may have loved these 3 boys before I ever laid eyes on them." God is funny that way. Marigold turned pages. The diary went through Liam Hollander going off to fight in 1862. The diary went through his death at Cold Harbor in 1864. The diary went through Saoirse raising her boys alone on a high country homestead while the country burned itself in 2,000 miles east. The diary went through the day in 1863 when Ezekiel, just 19, walked down the mountain to enlist himself. The diary went through the day in 1865 when he walked back up it. The diary slowed in 1865. The diary slowed because Saoirse had begun to work. Saoirse had begun that year to take in laundry and mending for the families in Wraithwood Hollow. The boys were getting bigger. The boys were eating like wolves. Saoirse needed cash money and there was nowhere else to get it. She took in mending for the wife of the new bank president. The new bank president's name was Octavius Crowley. His wife's name was Honora Crowley. Marigold turned pages. Marigold turned pages faster. Saoirse wrote about Honora Crowley. Saoirse wrote about how Honora was kind, about how Honora gave her cakes wrapped in cloth napkins to take home for the boys, about how Honora was not happy, about how Honora had bruises, about how Honora began in the spring of 1866 to whisper things to Saoirse when they were alone, about what her husband did at night, about a cellar, about what was in the cellar, about how she was afraid she would die soon. Saoirse wrote on April 14, 1866, that she had decided to go to the sheriff. Saoirse wrote on April 16, 1866, that the sheriff had told her to mind her business and stop spreading lies about respectable men. Saoirse wrote on April 19, 1866, that Honora Crowley had been found dead of a sudden illness. The doctor said it was a fever. Octavius Crowley wept at the funeral. I do not think Octavius Crowley has ever wept a real tear in his life. Saoirse wrote on April 22, 1866, I do not know what to do. The boys have lost their father already. I cannot risk them losing me. But Honora was my friend, and what she told me about that cellar should not die with her. I must think. I must pray. I must decide. Saoirse wrote on May 1, 1866, I have decided. I will speak to the circuit judge when he comes through in June. I will tell him what Honora told me. Until then, I will say nothing more to anyone. May God protect me. There were no more entries. The last page in the diary, written on May 1, 1866, had been the last thing Saoirse Hollander ever wrote. She had been killed 2 weeks later, officially by a riding accident, officially by being thrown from her mare on the path above Bear Creek. Officially. Marigold closed the diary. Her hands were shaking. She looked up at Ezekiel. She said she did not fall off her horse. His face was white. His face had not been white in any of the weeks she had known him, and it was white now. He said Crowley. She said Crowley. Mordecai had sat down very slowly in the chair across the table. His hands were flat on the wood. The hands were not steady. He said Ma was murdered. The cabin was silent. The cabin was so silent she could hear the snow shift on the roof. Then the door opened. Phineas came in with an armful of split pine. He stamped his boots. He looked up. He saw their faces. He saw the trunk. He saw the diary. He saw the tears on Mordecai's cheeks that Mordecai did not know were there yet. He set the wood down very slowly. He said, "Tell me." Ezekiel told him. It took 10 minutes. When he was done, Phineas was standing in the middle of the cabin with his hands at his sides, and his whole face had gone the color of bone. Then his face changed. The boy in him went away. The man underneath the boy came up. He said, "I'm going down the mountain." Ezekiel said, "No." Phineas said, "I am going down that mountain tonight, and I'm going to put a bullet through Octavius Crowley's heart." Ezekiel stood up. He stood up very slowly, and he was very, very tall. He said, "No." Phineas said, "Brother." Ezekiel said, "Finn, look at me." Phineas looked. Ezekiel said, "Ma did not raise us to be the thing that killed her. Ma raised us to be the thing that survives the thing that killed her. There is a difference. There is the only difference, and we are going to remember it." Phineas opened his mouth. Phineas closed his mouth. Phineas's face crumpled. For the first time in 12 years in front of his brothers and a stranger he had met 3 weeks ago, Phineas Hollander put his hands over his face and wept. Ezekiel crossed the floor. Ezekiel put his arms around his youngest brother. Ezekiel held him. Mordecai joined them. Mordecai put one hand on Phinehas's back and the other on Ezekiel's shoulder, and the three Hollander brothers stood in the middle of their mother's cabin and held each other, and Marigold sat at the table with the diary in her lap, and she did not move. She did not move because she understood very clearly that what was happening in front of her was something she had not been invited to. It was something that had been waiting 12 years to happen. It was something between three men and a dead woman they had loved. She sat very still. She let them have it. After a while, Ezekiel looked up. His eyes found hers across the room. He held her gaze. He said, "Marigold." She said, "Yes." He said, "Come here." She rose from the chair. She walked across the cabin. She walked steadily on her own 2 feet on the floor of a house on a mountain at the top of a Colorado winter. And when she reached them, Ezekiel opened his arm without letting go of his brothers, and he made a place for her in the circle, and she stepped into it. She stepped in. She belonged there now. She did not know yet what she would do about Octavius Crowley. She did not know yet what would happen when the snow melted and the men came up the mountain. She did not know yet what Bridget Tully would say when the truth finally came out. But she knew with her one good arm around Phineas Hollander's back and her cheek against Ezekiel Hollander's wool shirt, and her tears mixing with Mordecai Hollander's tears on the planks of a cabin built by a dead woman, that she was no longer alone. She had not been alone since the night three big shapes came up the porch steps of the Crowley house in a blizzard and carried her out. She had not been alone, and she would not be alone again. Not in this life. Outside, the snow began to fall again, soft and slow. The kind of snow that comes down when the wind is finally rested. The kind of snow that means winter is no longer raging. The kind of snow that means winter is preparing in its slow, patient way to end. Spring was coming. Spring was coming, and with it the men. And the four of them in the cabin at the top of Frostfang Ridge stood in their circle and held each other, and they were ready. They would be ready. The thaw came in March. It did not come gently. It came the way a hard winter ends in the Colorado high country, with a crack, with a shudder, with the sound of ice on Bear Creek breaking up at 3 in the morning and rolling downhill in slabs the size of barn doors. Ezekiel heard it first. He was already awake. He had been sleeping shallower since the diary had come down from the loft. He sat up in his cot. He listened. The ice was going. He swung his legs over the side. He pulled on his trousers. He pulled on his wool shirt. He went out onto the porch in his stocking feet. The night was cold. The night was clear. The stars were the stars of a mountain in March. Bright, bright, bright. The creek roared below. He stood listening. He stood listening, and he knew. He knew that within 2 weeks the passes would be open. He knew that within 3 weeks Octavius Crowley would have heard from a hostler or a trapper or a man with a story to sell that a young woman in a navy dress had been carried out of Wraithwood Hollow on the night of the December blizzard, and that she had not been carried back. He knew that Octavius Crowley would not let that be. He turned. He went back inside. He looked at the 3 sleeping forms in the cabin. Mordecai in the second cot, Phineas in the third, Marigold up in the loft, her honey-colored hair spilled across the pillow, her arm out of its splint now and finally healing clean. He looked at her for a long time. Then he sat down at the table and he began to write. He wrote 4 letters. He wrote them by lamplight. He wrote them in the slow, careful hand of a man who had been taught penmanship by a woman named Sarah She Hollander and had not forgotten. He wrote to the circuit judge in Denver. He wrote to the editor of the Denver newspaper. He wrote to a Pinkerton agent named Cassius Vane, whose name Mordecai had pulled out of a 6-month-old newspaper that had drifted up the mountain in a peddler's pack. And he wrote to a girl he had never met, a girl named Bridget Tully, care of the rectory of the Wraithwood Hollow Church in the keeping of Reverend Pickering, because he did not trust the post office of that town, and he did trust Reverend Pickering. Just barely. Just enough. The letter to Bridget was the shortest. It said, "Miss Tully, the woman you wrote 18 letters for is alive. She is safe. She is with us. We know what you did. We know why you did it. We know what you have lived in for 4 years. If you can leave that house alive, leave. Walk to the rectory. Tell Reverend Pickering my name. He will know what to do. If you cannot leave that house alive, hold on. 20 days, we are coming. Yours with deep respect, E. Hollander. He folded the letters. He sealed them with candle wax. He put them in his coat pocket. He went back to the porch. He watched the sky lighten over the eastern peaks. He thought 20 days. He thought 20 days, and then I will not be the one who failed her. He thought 20 days, and Sarah Hollander will finally rest. Marigold woke at first light. She woke because she felt the cabin breathing differently. She climbed down the loft ladder one rung at a time. The arm was good now. Mordecai had taken the splint off 3 weeks ago. The bone had knit straight. She had been doing the exercises he prescribed. She found Ezekiel on the porch. He turned when he heard the door. She said the ice went. He said yes. She said how long? He said 20 days at the outside. She said all right. He looked at her. He said, Marigold, I want you to think very carefully now. She said yes. He said, I want you to think about whether you want to be on this mountain when he comes or whether you want to be in Denver. Mordecai will take you. There is a stage from the foot of the pass once a week. You could be in a hotel in Denver by Sunday. You could write a letter from a hotel in Denver. You could testify from a hotel in Denver. You do not have to be here. She thought about it. She thought about it for 2 breaths. She said, Zeke. He said, yes. She said, do you remember what you said to me in the cabin the night we read the diary? He said, I said a lot of things that night. She said, you said we are going to stop him, all 3 of us, and you, if you want. He said, I remember. She said, I want. He held her gaze. He nodded. He said, all right then. He did not try to talk her out of it. She loved him a little more for that. She loved him a little more for not pretending she was something she was not. She had walked 900 miles into a lie. She had been hit by a man in a charcoal suit. She had been carried up a mountain in a blizzard. She had set her own broken arm against the gray of his eyes. She had read the diary of his dead mother. She had wept for a girl named Bridget Tully who had written her 18 letters to save her. She was not the woman who had stepped off the train in December. She was not going to stand in a hotel in Denver and write a letter from a distance. She was going to be here. She said, what is the plan? He told her. The plan was good. The plan was simple. The plan was the plan of a man who had been a soldier in a war when he was 19 and had not forgotten the lessons of a war. She listened. She nodded. She said, and Bridget. He said, Bridget is the linchpin. If Bridget will testify, this ends in a courtroom. If Bridget is dead by the time we reach the hollow, this ends differently. She said, define differently. He said, I would rather you not ask. She did not ask. She thought, I am going to learn to fire that Winchester. She thought, and I am going to learn to fire it well. She learned. For 2 weeks she learned. Phineas taught her. Phineas taught her in a snowy clearing 200 yards from the cabin, where the elk had bedded down in the winter and the snow was still chest deep, but the surface was crusted hard enough to walk on. He set up bottles. He set up pine cones. He set up an old tin of axle grease balanced on a stump. He said, stock to the shoulder, tight, tighter. No, stop apologizing, tighter. The kick is going to bruise you either way. If it's tight, it bruises your shoulder. If it's loose, it breaks your collarbone. Pick your bruise. She picked her bruise. She put the stock tight against her shoulder. He said, cheek to the wood, eye down the sight, front bead in the notch, front bead on the target, front bead, front bead. Stop looking at the rear sight. Stop looking at me. Stop looking at anything except the front bead and the thing you are going to hit. Breathe in. Breathe out. Halfway through the out. Squeeze. She squeezed. The Winchester barked. The tin of axle grease leaped off the stump and rolled 15 feet down the slope. Phineas grinned a grin she had not seen since the day she woke up in the cabin. He said again, "She did it again. She did it every day for 2 weeks. By the end of the second week, she could hit a pine cone at 60 yards 3 times out of 4. By the end of the second week, she could load the magazine in the dark. By the end of the second week, she could chamber a round without making a sound." Mordecai watched her one afternoon from the porch. He said quietly to Ezekiel, "She is not the same girl." Ezekiel said no. Mordecai said, "Is that a good thing or a sad thing?" Ezekiel watched her bring the rifle up, sight squeeze drop a pine cone clean off a branch at 70 yards. He said, "Both." On the 18th day, a man came up the trail. The man was alone. The man was on foot. The man had snowshoes strapped to a pack on his back. The man was small, gray-haired, white-collared. He was Reverend Pickering. He was carrying a satchel. Ezekiel saw him from a quarter-mile out. He set down the axe. He whistled once. Phineas appeared from behind the lean-to with his rifle. Mordecai came up onto the porch with a pistol tucked into his waistband. Marigold came out behind Mordecai. Pickering stopped at the edge of the clearing. He raised his hands. He called Hollander. "It is Pickering. I have come from the hollow. I have a girl with me. She is half a mile back. She could not climb anymore. She is sitting in the snow. She is alive, but she is not strong. Please." Ezekiel said one word. "Mordecai." Mordecai grabbed his medical kit. Mordecai took the bay mare and went down the trail at a run. Pickering walked up to the porch slowly. He was very tired. His cheeks were windburned. His old eyes were wet. He looked at Marigold. He looked at her for a long time. He said, "Mrs. Crowley." She said, "Miss Pemberton." He nodded. He said, "Miss Pemberton, forgive me. Forgive me, child." She said, "What for?" He said, "For marrying you to him. For not stopping the ceremony, for knowing what I knew and bearing 3 women in 3 years and saying nothing." She said, "Reverend." He said, "Yes." She said, "You came up this mountain on snowshoes at 64 years of age to bring me a witness. We will speak about forgiveness when this is over. For now, come inside." He came inside. He sat in the rocking chair by the fire. Ezekiel poured him coffee. Pickering wrapped his frozen hands around the tin cup. He drank. He looked up at Ezekiel. He said, "Your letter was the bravest thing I have read in my 50 years in the ministry. The Pinkerton man Vane is in Denver. He has been gathering depositions for 2 weeks. The judge has been informed. The Denver paper has a reporter on standby for whenever you give the word. There is a federal marshal traveling to the hollow as we speak. The state has not waited on the sheriff. They have not waited on Crowley. They have not waited on the town." Ezekiel said, "And Bridget." Pickering closed his eyes. He said, "Bridget is the girl Mordecai went to fetch." Marigold's hand flew to her mouth. Pickering said, "She walked out of the Crowley house 6 days ago. She walked out at 4 in the morning with nothing but a shawl and a small bundle. She walked to the rectory. She knocked. She gave her name. She said, 'Reverend, I have something to tell you, and if you turn me away, I will not survive the day.'" He opened his eyes. He said, "I did not turn her away. I hid her in the cellar of the church for 5 days, while the deputies searched the town. I told Crowley she had run off in the night with a teamster from Silverton. He believed me because he believes any story that flatters him. When your letter came 2 days ago telling me to bring her up the mountain, I waited for nightfall, and I brought her." He sipped his coffee. He said, "She has been writing it all down. Everything she has seen in 4 years. Names, dates, where the bodies are buried, the cellar. The cellar in the Crowley House, Marigold. You did not know about the cellar. You will not need to know all of what is in it. But it will be opened. And it will be opened soon." Marigold sat down on the bench by the table. She sat down because her legs would not hold her. She thought the cellar. She thought Enora wrote about the cellar. She thought, oh God in heaven, O God of the wind that is honest. Ezekiel saw her face. He came around the table. He sat down beside her. He put his big, scarred hand over hers on the wood. He did not say anything. He only sat with her. She breathed. She breathed. She breathed. After a long time, she said, "How many?" Pickering said, 12. She closed her eyes. She said, 12. Pickering said, 3 wives, 7 housemaids before Bridget, 1 woman who came through the hollow on a stage in 1872 and was never seen leaving it, and 1 woman who was not a stranger at all, 1 woman who was the mother of the 3 boys in this cabin. Ezekiel's hand on Marigold's tightened. Marigold did not look at him. She did not look at him because she could feel what was happening in his face without looking. She turned her hand over under his. She laced her fingers through his fingers. She held. She held. She held. Mordecai came back at sundown. He came back on foot, leading the mare with a small bundled figure in his arms. The bundled figure was Bridget Tully. She weighed perhaps 90 pounds. She was wrapped in a wool blanket. Her face was the color of paper. But her gray eyes were open. Her gray eyes were open and they were looking around. Mordecai brought her inside. Mordecai laid her on Ezekiel's cot. Mordecai called for hot water and clean cloth and broth. Marigold knelt beside the cot. She looked into Bridget's eyes. Bridget looked back. Bridget's lips moved. The voice was so small Marigold had to bend her ear down to the girl's mouth. Bridget whispered, "Did you read them?" Marigold whispered, "I read them." Bridget whispered, "Did you understand?" Marigold whispered, "I understood. Eventually. I understood, Bridget. I understood every word." Bridget's gray eyes filled. The tears ran down sideways into her red hair on the pillow. She whispered, "Then it was worth it." Marigold took the girl's small, cold hand. Marigold pressed it to her own cheek. Marigold whispered, "It was worth every word. You wrote me through hell on purpose, Bridget Tully. You wrote me through hell because you knew I might bring someone with me when I came out. And I did. I brought 3 of them. And they are going to take that house apart and lay it open. Because of you. Because of one Irish housemaid who would not stop writing letters." Bridget's eyes closed. Bridget smiled. It was the first time Marigold had seen Bridget smile. The smile was small and weak and the most beautiful thing Marigold had ever seen. Bridget slept. She would sleep for 2 days. She would wake up on the 3rd day with a fever broken and an appetite for porridge and an entire town's worth of testimony locked behind her gray eyes, ready to be set down on the desk of a federal judge in Denver. But that was later. That night, Marigold sat by the cot and held Bridget's hand and would not let it go. Ezekiel brought her a quilt. He laid it across her shoulders. He sat down in the chair behind her. He stayed there all night. He came up the mountain on the 20th day. He came up with 5 men. He came up because a hostler in Denver had told him for a silver dollar that 3 Hollander brothers had been seen riding hard out of Wraithwood Hollow on the night of the December blizzard, with a small bundle wrapped in a coat across the saddle of the eldest brother's horse. He came up because his housemaid had vanished, because the rector was lying to him, because the sheriff would no longer meet his eye, because something was wrong in his town, and Octavius Crowley had spent more than a decade making sure nothing was ever wrong in his town that he had not put there himself. He came up in a buggy. He came up in a charcoal coat and a bowler hat and a gold watch chain across his waistcoat. He came up with a hired bounty hunter, a man named Rance Sutter, and 4 hired guns from the Denver railhead. He did not know about the federal marshal coming up behind him by half a day. He did not know about Pickering on the mountain. He did not know about Bridget in the cabin. He did not know about the letters in his locked drawer, which were no longer in his locked drawer because Reverend Pickering had borrowed his housemaid's key the morning before he left town and had carried the entire stack up the mountain in his satchel. He did not know any of these things. He thought he was coming to retrieve a piece of property. He was not. Phineas spotted them at mid-morning. He came down off the ridge above Bear Creek at a run. He came in through the back of the cabin. He said one word, 6. Ezekiel said, where? Phineas said, Bear Creek Crossing, 20 minutes. Ezekiel said, all right. He turned. He looked at Marigold. He said, last chance, loft, stay there. She said, no. He said, Marigold. She said, Zeke, I am the only one of us he is coming for. He does not believe I will face him. He has spent more than a decade building a world in which women do not face him. We are going to give him something he does not believe in. He looked at her for a long moment. He nodded. He said, all right then. He kissed her. It was not a long kiss. It was not a soft kiss. It was the kiss of a man who had been waiting 2 months for the right second to do it, and the second had arrived and he was not going to waste it. He kissed her in the middle of the cabin with his 2 brothers watching and Reverend Pickering watching and Bridget Tully sleeping on the cot. And when he stepped back, his face had gone pink under the scar. She touched his cheek. She said later. He said later. Phineas from the doorway said, Lord above now. The man is coming up the trail and you 2 pick now. Mordecai said, Finn, shut up. Phineas said, shutting up. They moved. The Bear Creek crossing was a narrow place. Boulders on one side, a bluff on the other. The creek ran fast and high with snowmelt. The trail came up between the boulders and the bluff in a single file. Phineas was on the bluff with his rifle. Mordecai was behind the boulders with his. Ezekiel was at the crossing itself in the open with the sharps across his arm. Marigold was 30 yards behind him in the trees with the Winchester. She had not wanted to be behind. She had wanted to be at his shoulder. He had said no. He has to see me first. He has to see one man alone. He has to think we are arrogant. He has to walk into it. You are not in the trap. You are the jaws of the trap. Wait for my whistle. She waited. She knelt behind a pine. She breathed slowly. She did the thing Phineas had taught her. Stock to shoulder. Tight. Tighter. Cheek to wood. Eye down the sight. She waited. And then they came up the trail. 6 men. She saw Crowley first. Charcoal coat. Bowler. The gold watch chain. He rode at the front in his buggy, which had been replaced at the foothills by a horse, because the trail had narrowed too much for wheels. Behind him Sutter, lean, hard, a long mustache, 2 pistols on his belt, a rifle across his pommel. Behind Sutter, the 4 Denver men. They came around the bend. They stopped. Because Ezekiel Hollander was standing in the middle of the trail alone with a sharps across his arm and a face that had not moved in 20 years. Crowley's horse pulled up. Crowley stared. Crowley smiled. Crowley said, Mr. Hollander. Ezekiel said, Mr. Crowley. Crowley said, I believe you have something of mine. Ezekiel said, I have nothing of yours. Crowley said, my wife. Ezekiel said, you have no wife. A silence. Crowley's smile did not move, but the eyes above the smile changed. The eyes of the man in the cellar came up. He said very softly, Sutter. Sutter said, yeah. Crowley said, shoot him. Sutter raised the rifle. Sutter did not get to fire. Because from the bluff, there was a single sharp report, and Sutter's rifle leaped sideways out of his hands with the trigger guard shattered, and Sutter himself went over the back of his horse with a yelp and rolled 6 feet down the slope before he caught himself on a root. Phineas from the bluff hollered, next one is your heart, mister. Lay down where you are. Sutter laid down where he was. The 4 Denver men reached for their weapons. The 4 Denver men stopped reaching. Because Mordecai had stood up from behind the boulders with his rifle, and from the trees on the opposite side, there was another rifle, a Winchester, Marigold's, pointed straight at the chest of the lead Denver man. The Denver men were professionals. The Denver men counted angles. The Denver men set their weapons on the ground. All 4 of them. Slowly. Crowley sat on his horse in the middle of the trail. He looked from the bluff to the boulders to the trees to Ezekiel. His face had gone the color of paper. He said, Hollander. Ezekiel said, Crowley. Crowley said, whatever she has told you, whatever she has said. Ezekiel said, she has not told us. The diary told us. A pause, a long one. Crowley's hands tightened on the reins. Crowley said, what diary? Ezekiel said, Saoirse Hollander's. The silence that followed was the deepest silence Marigold had ever heard outside a church. It was a silence with a shape. It was the silence of a man who has been a king of his small kingdom for 12 years and has just heard his crown hit the floor. Crowley said that woman fell off a horse. Ezekiel said that woman was murdered. Crowley said, you cannot prove. Ezekiel said, Bridget Tully. The name landed. The name landed and Crowley's face came apart. It came apart in stages. Disbelief first, then calculation, then rage. Then underneath the rage, a small flash of something Marigold had not seen on him before. Fear. He kicked his horse forward. He kicked his horse straight at Ezekiel. The horse plunged. Ezekiel sidestepped. The horse went past him. Crowley wrenched the reins. He came down off the saddle with a pistol in his hand. A silver-plated Colt with mother-of-pearl grips. The pistol Marigold had seen on his sideboard the night of her wedding. The pistol he had never bothered to hide from his bride because she had been so small in his eyes she might as well have been furniture. He brought the pistol up. He did not bring it up at Ezekiel. He brought it up at the trees. He brought it up because he had heard in his head a sentence Ezekiel had said 2 minutes ago, "You have no wife." And he had understood in the part of his mind that calculated that the wife in question must be very close. He fired blind into the trees. The bullet struck the pine next to Marigold's shoulder. Bark sprayed her cheek. She did not flinch. She had not flinched in 3 months. She rose from her knee. She stepped out from behind the pine. She walked forward. She walked forward into the open, onto the trail, past Ezekiel, past the 4 Denver men, past Sutter on the ground, toward the man in the charcoal coat with the silver Colt in his hand and the face she had married 3 months ago in a church with a leaning steeple. Ezekiel said, Marigold. She did not turn. She kept walking. Crowley swung the Colt. He aimed it at her. He said, stop. She did not stop. She kept walking. The Winchester was in her hands. She held it loose and ready, the way Phineas had taught her, the way a person holds a tool they have learned. She stopped 15 feet from him. She said, Octavius. He said, stop right there, I will shoot. She said, Octavius, look at me. His eyes flicked to her face. Just for a second. Just long enough. She said, I am not the girl who stepped off the train. He said, Marigold. She said, Pemberton. He said, Mrs. Crowley. She said, Pemberton. Her voice did not rise. Her voice did not break. Her voice was the voice of a young woman who had spent 3 months on a mountain, learning what her voice sounded like when no one was hitting her for it. She said, Octavius, I am going to tell you something now. I am going to tell you because I want you to hear it from me with your hands free and your gun pointed at my chest before the federal marshal who is coming up this mountain behind you takes your hands and binds them. Do you understand? He said, federal. She said, Marshal. Yes, half a day behind you. He started from Denver 3 days ago. He will be at this creek by sundown. He has Bridget Tully's sworn deposition. He has Saoirse Hollander's diary. He has the 18 letters Bridget wrote in your name. He has the photographs of 3 graves on your property. He has the surveyor's report on the cellar. He has everything, Octavius. Everything. His face had gone past white. His face had gone the color of milk left in the sun. He said, you. She said, I. He said, you did this. She said, Bridget did this. You did this to yourself. I am only the woman who walked into the room you forgot to lock. He said, I will kill you. She said, you may try. I would prefer you did not. I would prefer this end in a courtroom. I would prefer the 3 women in your back garden have their names spoken in front of a judge. I would prefer Sarah Hollander have her name spoken in front of her three sons. I would prefer the world to know what you are and for what you are to be hanged for in front of an honest crowd on a clean morning by a state of Colorado that has finally caught up to a man who has been running ahead of it for more than a decade. She held his eyes. She did not blink. She said, "But Octavius, if you fire that pistol, if you so much as twitch that finger, I will fire mine. I have spent 2 months learning how. I can drop a pine cone at 70 yards. You are 15 feet away. I will not miss." Silence. The creek ran. The pines moved in a small wind. A jay called somewhere very far away. Crowley's hand was shaking. The silver colt was shaking. She saw the moment he made the decision. She saw it before he made it. It was in the eyes. It was in the small tightening of the eyebrows. It was in the man in the cellar deciding that if he was going down, he was going to take the woman in front of him with him. He fired. She fired. His shot went wide and to the right because his hand was shaking and his decision had been made too late. Her shot did not. The 44-40 took him cleanly in the chest. High in center, the Winchester knocked back into her shoulder. The bruise Phineas had told her to choose blossomed instantly the way bruises do when the choice is made. Crowley went over backward. He sat down hard on the trail. The silver colt fell from his hand. He looked up at her. He looked up at her with an expression of complete and absolute astonishment. He had not believed even at the very end that she would do it. He opened his mouth. He tried to speak. Nothing came. His head tilted to the side. His eyes lost their light. Octavius Crowley, banker, mine owner, deacon, murderer of 12, was dead at the bottom of Bear Creek Crossing on a March morning in 1879. He was 43 years old. He had killed his last woman. Marigold lowered the rifle. Her hands were steady. Her face was wet. She did not know when her face had become wet. She turned. Ezekiel was already crossing the trail to her. He reached her in 4 strides. He did not say anything. He put his arms around her. She let go of the rifle. The rifle dropped into the snow. She put both of her arms around his neck. She buried her face in his wool shirt. She did not weep loudly. She wept the way she had learned to weep in his cabin. Quiet. Hers. For Marigold. He held her. He held her for a long time. Behind them, Mordecai came out from behind the boulders and walked over to the 4 Denver men who were sitting in the snow now with their hands on their heads. Phineas came down off the bluff with his rifle still trained on Sutter. Pickering came out from where he had been waiting on the backside of the bluff with his prayer book in his hand. The federal marshal came up the trail at sundown exactly as Marigold had predicted. He brought 6 deputies. He brought handcuffs. He brought a buckboard for Crowley's body. He brought in his saddlebag a warrant signed by a federal judge in Denver and a stack of telegrams from the Denver paper and a notarized copy of every single one of the 18 letters that Bridget Tully had written in the name of a man who could not have written them. The marshal took the 4 Denver men into custody. The marshal took Sutter into custody. The marshal accepted the testimony of Reverend Pickering, of Mordecai Hollander, of Phineas Hollander, of Ezekiel Hollander, of Bridget Tully, sworn and signed at the cabin that evening, and of Miss Marigold Pemberton, late of Boston, Massachusetts. The marshal did not lay a hand on Marigold. The marshal removed his hat to her. He said, "Ma'am, the state of Colorado thanks you." She did not know what to say to that. She said, "Thank you." He put his hat back on. He turned his horse. He led the procession down the mountain. The trial was held in Denver in May. It lasted 4 days. Bridget testified for 2 of them. Marigold testified for 1. Reverend Pickering testified for half. The doctor who had filled out 3 false death certificates testified for the other half, with tears running into his beard. The diary was entered into evidence. The 18 letters were entered into evidence. The cellar was surveyed and documented. The bodies in the back garden in the cellar were recovered with the dignity that had not been afforded them when they were buried. Saoirse Hollander already had her stone in a meadow above Frostfang Ridge, where her three sons had laid it 12 years before. Honora Crowley, first wife, Theodora Crowley, second, Augusta Crowley, third, and 8 other names. Each of them was given a stone. Each of the stones was paid for by the estate. The estate of Octavius Crowley was by the court's ruling dissolved. A portion was set aside for the families of the dead. A portion was awarded by separate ruling under the laws of restitution to the 3 surviving sons of Saoirse Hollander on grounds of wrongful death. The Hollander brothers received $22,000. They put a portion of it in the bank. The rest they set aside for 2 things they had been thinking about all spring. The wedding was in June. Reverend Pickering performed it. It was held in the small church with the leaning steeple. The steeple had been straightened over the spring by a crew of miners on their day off. They had done it for free. Marigold wore a dress of pale yellow silk. Ezekiel wore a black wool suit that Mordecai had made him buy in Denver, and that he tugged at the collar of the entire ceremony. Mordecai stood as best man. Phineas stood beside him, and his grin took up the whole lower half of his face from the moment Marigold appeared at the back of the church until the moment Reverend Pickering said, "You may kiss the bride." Bridget Tully sat in the front pew on the bride's side. She wore a dress of soft blue cotton sewn by her own hand. Her red hair was up. Her gray eyes shone. She had put on 20 pounds since March. She had begun teaching Tomas his letters in the evenings and had discovered somewhere in the doing of it that she had a gift for the teaching. When Reverend Pickering said, "You may kiss the bride," Ezekiel turned to Marigold. He bent his head. His lips brushed hers. They were warm. They were not brief. The pews rose. The pews cheered. Phineas hollered something that made Mordecai elbow him in the ribs. And Marigold Pemberton, who had crossed 900 miles of country she had never seen to marry a man whose face she had never looked upon, became Marigold Hollander, the wife of a man whose face she had memorized, whose voice she had memorized, whose hand she had held through 3 months of winter and 3 months of spring, in one cool June afternoon in a small church that smelled of beeswax and pine, in the sweet papery smell of a hymnal opened 1,000 times. They walked out of the church together. The town of Wraithwood Hollow stood on the steps and threw rice. That September, 3 months after the wedding, the rest of the Hollander money found its use. The brothers bought every share of the Crowley mine, dissolved its name, and reopened it under the name Saoirse Silver, paying its miners a wage 30% above the previous owner's wage and offering medical care to anyone injured on the job with Mordecai Hollander as the official company doctor. And on a piece of land on Front Street that Crowley had once tried to sell to the railroad and would not let go of, they built a one-room schoolhouse. The schoolhouse opened on the first Monday of September. The wooden sign above the door read in carved letters that Phineas had spent 3 weeks getting right: Saoirse Hollander Memorial Schoolhouse. Underneath the name in smaller letters it read, "She loved 3 boys before she ever laid eyes on them. She would have loved you too." The first teacher was Mrs. Marigold Hollander. The assistant teacher was Miss Bridget Tully. The 2 of them taught reading and writing and arithmetic and penmanship. They taught the children of Wraithwood Hollow that the wind in this country was honest. They taught them that the people now could be too. The first summer in the cabin had been a summer of new walls. Phineas had built an addition off the east side for Marigold's books. The books had come up from Boston that May, the last of her father's library, sent by an old friend of her father's, who had heard the story in the Denver paper and had asked by telegram whether the new Mrs. Hollander would still want her books. She had. Mordecai had built her a writing desk by the east window. Ezekiel had built her with his own hands over the course of 3 weeks a rocking chair to match the one by the hearth. The rocking chair sat by the writing desk. It was the chair she sat in to read her students' letters when they wrote to her over the long summer holiday. In late August, she had planted a small garden in the meadow behind the cabin. Marigolds, of course. And beside them a row of Irish heather sent in a small paper packet from a woman in County Cork at the request of Tomas O'Connor's mother for Bridget. The Irish heather did not grow well in Colorado soil. The marigolds grew like fire. Cersei Hollander's grave was in the same meadow marked by a flat stone that the brothers had laid 12 years before. Marigold weeded around it once a week. She talked to Cersei while she weeded. She told her how the school was doing. She told her about the children by name. She told her how Phineas had begun to read aloud in the evenings from the Whittier book on the bookshelf. She told her about the boys. She told her that she had loved them too. In October, the first snow came again. It came soft. It came slow. It came the way snow comes when winter is not yet raging, but is only saying hello. Marigold stood on the porch and watched it fall. Ezekiel came out behind her. He put his arms around her from behind. She leaned back against his chest. He said into her hair, "Cold." She said, "Mm-hmm." He said, "Come inside." She said, "In a moment." He waited. She watched the snow fall on the cabin, on the meadow, on the small grave with the flat stone, on the new garden where the marigolds were finished and the heather had finally taken in one corner, on the path that led somewhere down the mountain to a small town with a schoolhouse and a leaning steeple and a young woman with red hair who would be teaching first reading on Monday morning. She thought, "I will be 23 in November." She thought, "I am the wife of the eldest of three brothers who live at the top of a mountain in Colorado, and I teach school, and my best friend is a girl from County Cork who saved my life by writing to me in the wind of a stranger, and I have planted a garden over the grave of a woman who would have loved me too." She thought I came here following a lie. She thought I stayed here following something else. She thought I do not know yet what to call the something else. She thought I think it might be enough simply to live inside it. Ezekiel's arms tightened around her. He said, "Marigold." She said, "Yes." He said, "The wind." She said, "Yes." He said, "It is honest." She smiled. She turned in his arms. She put her hand against the scar on his cheek, the scar she had memorized over a winter of waking up to see him sleeping in the chair by her cot, of watching him chop wood from the rocking chair by the fire, of standing beside him on a creek crossing in March with a Winchester in her hands. She said, "Zeke?" He said, "Yes." She said, "So are the people." He kissed her. Inside the cabin, Mordecai was making coffee. Phineas was laughing at something he had read in last week's Denver paper. The fire was lit. The kettle was on. A house with a fire, a kettle, and four people who loved each other in a meadow at the top of a mountain. A house with a husband whose hand was the size of a plate and whose heart was the size of the mountain, and two brothers who were not blood and were closer than blood, and a girl in County Cork blue cotton who would arrive on Sunday for supper. A house that was hers now. A house that was theirs. A house she had walked 900 miles to find. The snow came down. The kettle whistled. Ezekiel took her hand. She went inside.